There weren't that many of us, and it was largely acoustic instrumentation with just a bit of a stage on a couple of wooden pallets, assembled in Windsor Great Park in the Queen's back garden. Thames Valley Police fielded 600 coppers who came over the field, and my experience of policing up to that point was, now come along, move along now, or something like that. And this copper walked up to me, and he hit me on the side of the head with a truncheon, and I've still got the scar, just about here. And I fell off my log with my cup of tea, and I've never been the same since. I suppose just, I'm a teenager, fresh out of school and so on. Like, you smoke cannabis, you take this, that, and the other, and you listen to rock bands like Hawkwind, and you associate as a tribal thing with your mates, and you have a nice time. Hedonism, to want of a better expression, like. But it don't take too long before you realise that really the idea of culture is how you manage yourself, your family, your tribe, and realizing that the state politics, it out there, doesn't give two hoots for you. And the idea of self-reliance, and followed up by anarchy, was about the time that I started to have a bit more historical reading, and I became aware of an outfit called the Levellers, the Diggers, the people that survived the English Civil War and then started to take back the commons and to have a notion of self-reliance and a tribal identity. The mainstream press started to call this anarchy, with a large A and a sneer. If you look at the Greek definition, it's government without authority. It doesn't mean to say that with a big black cloak, big hat and a bomb, you can do what you like. It is government, it's cooperation, it's working it out together. Bring what you expect to find. If not you, who? If not here, where? Can a country the size of Britain operate on those principles? Well, probably not, but we're small is beautiful. The Shoemaker book at the time, like concern about the environment, that we can't do things on large scale, and that by managing things on small family tribal scales, we can, and we make less mess, more social concern. The notion of the People's Free Festival, i.e. an annual gathering where we decide what else happens through the course of the year and we work out a circuit, that was the title that was originally given to the Windsor Festival. But at the collapse of the Windsor Festival in 1974, that was never repeated in that location. But at about the same time, people started to gather next to Stonehenge. And they were very small gatherings to start with. But because people have always gathered together in small tribal groups at ancient monuments, we wonder what they were for. We don't know whether it's to do with the cosmic elements of things, whether it's to do with the agricultural elements of things, but bloody hell, we know it's to do with the gathering and tribal elements of things. And people have done this for 5,500 years there, and we didn't see why that wasn't appropriate to our lives as well. After leaving school, I got a small van with a mate of mine, and we went round a few events, really quite sort of 50 and 60, a couple of hundred type events after Windsor. Eventually, I ended up in a street of squats in South London, and at about the same time, I'm talking about unconventionality, I joined as an accident ambulance man in the London Ambulance Service, and trained to do that. And in the course of my work, I dealt with the IRA bombs in the Chelsea restaurants. One of the biggest gigs that I had to do was the Ideal Home Exhibition bomb that exploded there. It was downright dangerous. I've been nearly blown up once outside King's Cross station and shot at twice. And I thought for £44 a week at the time, like, this was a bit extreme. Anyway, I lasted for 6 years doing that. And by going home to a street of squats and doing a professional job in a disciplined service, I couldn't see what was strange about that, but others did look at it a bit askance. So, hey, never mind. I was starting to offer my services for what I had been trained to do to the tribe that I've just described. If you rock up with a festival at the edge of a town and you start to have accidents, people break arms, they have babies, they get ill, you then go to the local hospital and you use their local services. That's one of the ways in which you throw rocks at this lifestyle, by saying you don't pay tax, you don't do this, you don't do the other, but you take. Well, okay, then we started to develop those services ourselves. And by doing so, I mean, if it obviously ended up with really serious and loss of several pints of blood or severe fractures or whatever, you then go to Salisbury General and you take the service because you're a British citizen and you're entitled. But we were able to mop up something like 80% of the requirements of several thousand people getting together and do these matters ourselves. And it turns out that over time, the tribe really appreciated this, and we're able to get others involved from various disciplines to engage with us. The service that we're providing wasn't just medicine. It turns out that a number of people were starting to have trouble in a social context. They were starting to meet more policemen on roadblocks on the way in. They were starting to be charged with offences and need representation. And it's at this point that the festival welfare services, welfare in the widest sense, started to notice that more people were distressed by the way that they were being treated by society and by the policing than we were starting to be able to cope with. So that's the start of my interest in photography, I have to tell you, that we're not believed in the way that people were just manhandled by violence, by intimidation, by rudeness, by just the way that you wouldn't expect a British citizen to be dealt with by a uniformed officer, but by being a new age traveller, young hippie or whatever, you were thought of something as just what you might have picked up on your shoe and just not dealt with responsibly. So with some photography, I was able to go out, demonstrate this to both the media and to senior policemen, and thought that by some of that early work that I was able to modify what it is that they did. I had the capacity to develop a film in the back of my truck. We'd gone down with some people who said that they were being generally abused and were violent. Policemen were violent towards them. I'd gone down deliberately with this group of people that had said this had happened to them, developed the film in the back of my truck, washed the print in a mountain stream, went down the road with a wet print to show it to the superintendent again, and instantly the police operation changed. This was news to both my community and to the police, and was able to change policing by witness, and I think that's still an important facet of things today. It started by the end of the 1970s to be an exponential growth. The last Stonehenge festival in 1984 was 6-7 weeks long. With Stonehenge in particular, some just visited for the weekend and went back to their work. Some stayed to be travellers. The mix of people from the professions, from the unemployed, from the socially concerned, from the eco types, that we hadn't invented the word environmentalist yet. This is just what people were engaged in their minds, that you tread lightly on the land, you use less, that consumerism is thought a bad thing. By saying that there was 30 or 40,000 people in the field, it doesn't take account of the fact that some people came and went, Glastonbury was occurring down the road over a weekend in the middle of all of this, and you might argue that there was something like 100, 200, 250,000 people flowing through. But that's just the Stonehenge Festival. By a certain amount of intelligence and realisation, you can see that by that being one of the bigger free festivals, that's where people get together and think, well, what are we going to do next? And the circuit around the country started to develop. One of the first flags to government to worry about this was 1982, as it turns out, which is when people became called the Peace Convoy. It was a sneer. It wasn't us calling ourselves the Peace Convoy, it was the Daily Mail and the Express and a few others, because of some of the violence that were perceived, i.e. not hippies hitting policemen hitting hippies, and then reattributing who was responsible for all of this. Peace, certainly not. Well, that year they went to Greenham Common, and Greenham Common, of course, was the United States Air Force Station, which Ronald Reagan and Maggie Thatcher had just signed the deal to base the cruise missiles at. And so you had the women peace camp there, you had other people from CND concerned about it, and now you've got these socially aware young people. It's about that time that other people got together and formed an outfit called Cruise Watch. And what that was about was getting in the way of the convoy that used to leave the station and then deploy anywhere in the southeast or southwest of England, such that the Russians couldn't be sure where those instruments were. So suddenly you've got an international political situation such that that was acting under the umbrella of this huge hippie festival. The local services point of view, policing, because really there's lots of law breaking going on when it comes to sex, drugs, rock and roll and all the rest of it. And so it's obvious that something needed to be done for political advantage from the Tories. They realised that Stonehenge was central to quite a lot of what else went on as far as the circuit that developed, and that by cutting off the Hydra's head you might stand a better chance of messing up the rest of it. At the same time, the wheels were coming off politically with the inner city riots, the haves and the have-nots, the economic distress of young people living in squats and not being able to make their way in one way or another. Of course, by the 83, 84, the miners' strike was in full sway. The idea of the flying pickets was invented by this industry, such that you went away from one coalfield to another to support your brothers in the distress that they were having there. And county policing, which is the way that we'd always been policed since the Middle Ages, was starting to fray a bit and not being able to deal with this. So the National Reporting Centre at the 5th floor at Scotland Yard was invented, and they coordinated police operations across the country as a unified military force, without the local, policing by consent of the local county set up. The defeat of the miners, by that means, meant that they'd still got that infrastructure in place, and politics, the Tory government, decided that, well, we could just dismantle this, but what else is outstanding? Oh, look. And that by applying the same strength of operation to weedy hippie families with no violent intent, compared with 20-stone large Yorkshire miners that they were arranged against, it was completely inequitable, and that's where much of the violence started to accelerate to the community around the country. Ambushes on the motorway system, where they diverted people off into the slip roads, and then policemen would, in the middle of the night, with no witnesses, 2 o'clock in the morning or something, as the convoy was going one place to the other, would ambush it, seal both ends, and then come over the embankments and attack people. There was the Nostell Priory in South Yorkshire, where some of the first institutional violence, where, you know, without witnesses, again in the middle of the night, just came over, with no law involved with this. It's just teaching people a lesson and hitting them with a stick until they conform. Earlier on in 1985, similar groups of people went to the United States Air Force Station at Molesworth in Cambridgeshire, another site of the cruise missile. So this is clearly an accelerating process for the government and the security services to be concerned about. Michael Heseltine was Minister of Defence at the time, and I remember him arriving at Molesworth with on the top of a tank with his flak jacket, and I mean we had a little bit of a label calling him Field Marshal Heseltine, you know, because he's showing off his strength for his political supporters. There's no law to this point to stop gathering. Trespass is a civil offence. You take an action against the trespassers, they get time to leave, and if they don't leave, then you can sue them for damages and places. The way round that was thought to be a get a judge to agree to have a High Court injunction by folks for property that you don't want them to be on. So English Heritage, the National Trust, the Salisbury District Council, Wiltshire County Council, and a number of other outfits got together and persuaded a judge to make a High Court injunction. That provided the legal cloak for them to do precisely what they wanted to. The tribes had gathered with an intention of gathering to Stonehenge. There's a couple of sites beforehand, Long Marsden Airfield in Warwickshire. We'd travelled down from that to Savernake Forest, just on the edge of Wiltshire, there to near Hampshire, and we'd gathered there the night before. Now we went in convoy the following day, and there's loads of breakdowns. Whenever you get 300 vehicles in a place of various mechanical competence, there's lots of breakdowns, lots of stops, and so on. And one of the reasons for travelling in convoy was not force of arms, but it was to support each other's in their mechanical adventures while trying to move around. So there we are, after a couple of hours trying to go in the direction of Stonehenge, where we start to meet more and more policemen, and they start to say, well, we can't go on, and we say, yes, we can, because there's several of us here, and we intend to go do what we've always done, We're not going to be harming in anybody's way, and the local community are out there with flags and waving at us, for heaven's sakes, as we're going past. We're a curio, we're a circus, we're not a threatening army by any means. But anyway, on the Wiltshire-Hampshire border, several miles from Stonehenge, we were met by 1,600 policemen, enormous numbers of vans and tackle, several ton of hardcore and sand dipped in the road in front of us, and squadrons of policemen running forward and without by your leave smashing windscreens and dragging people out of windows and generally making an assault. And of course, people seeing this, some of the people that had realised something before I had were starting to drive through a hedge into a field to get out of the way of this severe assault. And I did the same, and then the situation unfolded. Lines of coppers came onto the field. They intended to try and arrest as many people as they could, but people then started to drive around because they were frightened. And it's not just a question of evading arrest, it's a question of trying to avoid being assaulted with you and your family there. And eventually this standoff developed.
On the deck! Now stretch your arms out. Stretch them out!
to us.
I tell you what, will you just take care of him for a moment? We've got a broken arm. You come with me.
Okay, you're right there,
For a second, we'll have a look and see if we can take him together, eh?
You all right, with your hand?
What's wrong with it? What's happened?
Possibly a fractured skull.
What happened?
Please, lads, get on. Get this man out of here comfortable. When you're ready, lift it. Yeah. Bastards. Get out there!
Fucking watching this!
Find the barbed wire.
Take care of him now.
Is this the one that was kicking up on the road?
Tell you what, get somebody to tell her.
There was a number of cracked heads, quite a lot of blood, much distress. The initial entry onto the field was something around 2:30, 3 o'clock. The charge from the police to finish the job was at about 7 o'clock, and they arrested 582 people, and we were dispersed across the whole of South England, because of the number of police cells. I don't know how they didn't manage the number of people that are arrested to think what accommodation they'd had for them. And that was the beanfield. It was horrid, and I can remember it to this day, and I've never been the same since, having witnessed those scenes. I'm a photographer, and I was one of the few people that actually got work off the field because they stopped the media from witnessing this nastiness, except for Kim Sabido of ITN News, who actually managed to get on the site and do a lot of filming, and of course that's the only film footage that's available for you to see the horror of the day.
What we've witnessed in the last half an hour here has been surely some of the most brutal action by police forces in Britain for a long time. Whatever the causes, the end product seemed to be just hitting out wildly by the police, with babies in those trucks and in those buses, and young women with those babies in their arms were hit as well. At one stage, one of the cameramen from Fleet Street was arrested for being on this site. We were pushed and shoved to one side, but the worst of it all was that the people in those coaches who were trying to escape from the police were just grabbed, their windows were smashed, and they themselves were beaten, sometimes senselessly, on the floor.
What we later discovered, that the court case, that some of those policemen weren't policemen, they were the parachute regiment of the British Army in police uniform. So it's quite apparent that the law was just being used as a bit of a cloak to come out there and give us a pasting, which is exactly what we got. They can use as much force to uphold a High Court injunction as they feel is necessary. Well, they felt that's necessary, and it just gave them the legal authority to do that, they thought. It turns out that 24 of us took them to court later on, and we had civil action against them for the violence of the day, and we managed to get a hearing in Winchester Crown Court on these matters. It meant that because of some legal shenanigans that occurred then, the jury found for us, but we didn't get any money. The court case cost an awful lot of money. I think something like about £5-6 million, and the judge awarded half costs each to the police and us. So we got awarded £25,000 for the wrong that was done to us, but we owe £3 million. The inadequacy of the law in having to do this with a High Court injunction then gets round to the following year, the 1986 Public Order Act, which then criminalises the activity that they've had to try and deal with by the High Court injunction. The following year, the whole thing was repeated again in Hampshire at Stony Cross, as people again tried to get a gathering together in the southwest of England, preferably around Stonehenge. But mindful of the press coverage and the nastiness that had been obvious in the Beanfield the previous year, Operation Daybreak at Stony Cross was again a huge police operation, but without the damage that had been represented previously. But this time, social services were involved, and the idea was to take the children from the tribe by saying they weren't being brought up properly, and that the state needed to take some steps here for the interest of the child.
But all the kids came back to
Yes,
parents
yeah,
eventually?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But again, it was part of the mechanisms by which you're trying to modify behaviours. Yeah. We had an economy that supported people, rather than claim the dole in the city centre, where I'm telling you a lot of folks come from, by actually liaising and dealing and growing your community meant that you were able to exchange goods and services to each other and the visitors that came from outside. Without the support of the visitors, who were frightened of running the police roadblocks and the violence that they'd seen on the telly, it was just the core group of family folks in their vehicles that had been severely dismantled. It started to be very down at heel. I don't exaggerate by saying a refugee column. It looked like a refugee column. It was a refugee column. People were stateless, baseless. Families started to disintegrate. Bad drugs started to appear. Heroin is a case in point. You try and there was instances of the attempted sale of heroin at Stonehenge, and the community got together and physically removed such people because it's not a community-based drug. It's a self-indulgent. We hate everything, and I can't deal with life, and let me turn it off. Like that's not a community. That's not a tribal idea. But because of the no hope that was starting to be evident in the tribe at the time, living at the side of a lay-by with no resources, selling bits of a bus to buy drugs, to eventually wander around, no social responsibility, no tribal strength out of all of this. And I survived for another couple of years under these conditions, and again providing services as well as we could through the Travellers Aid Trust and Festival Welfare Services. And by the end of the 80s, I decided I had enough of that association. I'm still interested in alternative lifestyles, or still interested in living in the middle of Wales, of the communities that we had there, Tally Valley, Llywyn Piod and a few others like. But the peace convoy up to that point was then subjected to the law that I was going on to tell you about, the Public Order Act, 1986, Section 39. If 3 people bring with them 12 vehicles on a piece of land for the common purpose of residing there, then they commit an offence if they don't move when told to. And that was applied to traditional gypsies, travellers, Irish tinkers, Scottish gypsies. I mean, there's various other elements to this that the government intended to try and tidy up, but New Age travellers were at the front end of this. All of this was built on Thatcher's original notions that these people needed dealing with, and the law now criminalised trespass, where in the past, since Elizabethan and beyond times, that people rocked up on a piece of land, common land, wasteland, weren't in anybody's way, and then they moved around and doing that. And so nomadism is a perfectly honourable existence as far as I can see, but the law is now putting restrictions around that. And that takes you up to the end of the 1980s, and it's about that time that I thought, well, I need to polish my own skills, and why I came to Nottingham to study photography at university. So that's my out from that scene at that time. It turns out that by coming to Nottingham and meeting DIY, that I started to get a second wind. It started to become more of a nighttime thing. It's the music, the light shows, the whole thing has started to become 12 hours about from where I'm used to seeing it. And I'm starting to think, I don't think they realise it yet, but what they're doing is getting around the Public Order Act. That if 12 vehicles, 3 people, common land, residing, well, what if they don't reside there? What if they stay up all night and make a racket? And they've just steered around a law to enable a gathering, an assembly to still take place. It's not residing because they're having it large in the middle of the night, so they're not going to sleep then, are they? Although the culture the age, the motivation for gathering has all changed. It's become much more optimistic. It's become much more vibrant than what I've just left. But it's not an alternative lifestyle, because they go back to what it was that they were doing in the city, to work, to live, to play, to whatever, you know. And so the duration of events are still quite short. It's the point at which a few of us, myself included, have hopped the fence. I could see a way of perpetuating things a few years longer than otherwise it was going to, before it all ran in the sand like. So there was a second wind. And because of my own interests and the people that I was mixing with in Nottingham and things, I hopped the fences with an attitude and embraced the new culture. There's a fair number of other people that had infrastructure. They have marquees, they have buses, they have stages, they have the things that you would have generally had an outside gig to do. But you just put up a fluorescent flag on the tent instead of another one. Like, you know, the colour scheme changed. The idea of doing it in the middle of the night rather than the day, but the infrastructure, how you make things comfortable outside, is the expertise of travellers, isn't it? Like, in 1992, of course, the Castle Morton event has taken place. It happened on a weekend such that it lasted 5 or 6 days. But the previous weekend, there'd been the Letchlade event in Gloucestershire, and then there was the Forest Fair at Colford in the Forest of Dean, and Castle Morton ended up as being 25,000, 30,000 people. And the notion of this being mushrooming again started to become apparent to the authorities. The May Bank holiday was in the southwest of England at Ingliston. There was the People's Free Festival at Stonehenge in June. There were assorted things going on in Cambridgeshire and Norfolk. Not to mention the Pennines, the northern festivals, Ribblehead. You could almost draw a circle around England into Scotland. And at particular times of the year, you might not know which particular field you're going to, but you know that we resort to those areas. And that's what happened at Castle Morton, which is why it took place, because for the previous years it had always been Ingliston, Shedfield Common, Sodbury Common, that particular area where we'd habitually been at that time of year. And so there was the older traditional ones. It was nearby to Bristol and Gloucester and a couple of other conurbations. So people were able to get there at high speed once the site had been established. The police cottoned on to this and started to put resources in those areas when those cardinal points of the traditional calendar had started to occur. I have photographs of sites where you can see that by our cooperation, we've got the main drag, stalls arrive, neighbourhoods develop. If you could get an aerial picture, you can see a cooperation, how you decide where the main drag is. Well, a number of people get together and a main drag forms, and you don't have somebody put up a two-man tent in the middle of the main drag. Otherwise, a truck comes around the corner, runs over the tent, and main drag, resumes. At Castle Morton, I went up onto the top of the Malvern Ridge, and with a long lens, photographed aspects of the Castle Morton site. There's no cooperation. It's just people arrive, park, and set up. And you ended up with 4 different sound systems, main big sound systems, like such that it was a bit of an occupation of mine wandering around the site until you got a mix. You haven't had the guidance from the previous generation on how you do an outside event and make yourself comfortable. So the idea was to get past the police roadblock, have it large, and be prepared to move and go away again. Like, the infrastructure of how you make an event such that it's nice to be at, with all the facilities and the services, and you find your way around and so on, completely collapsed. Politics then took another pace forward and invented the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. If 20 people assemble in the open air on a field and listen to music that is characterised by a succession of repetitive beats, and they don't move when told to do so by a constable in uniform, then they commit an offence. So that's built on what was going on before. So although the people were trying to get round the law by assembly, it's the first time since Nazi-occupied Europe and Germany outlawed music that was characterised by syncopated beats. Travellers had travellers have never been the same since the end of the 80s. It was just a temporary thing that they got this second wind by providing goods and services for large-scale raving. And most people that are to do with that as a lifestyle fucked off abroad as soon as they could. All over Europe, you'll find that many of the events that, whether it's Technivals, Dragon Festival, Frequency Festival, they tended to be seeded by expatriate British folks that have buggered off. Like, environmentalism wasn't a label then, and it's become so now. And that many people, although they haven't been able to live in tribal circumstances, still keep the idea of assembly and environment and treading lightly on the land, and that's having concern. And one of the ways that's popped out from the traveller and ravey wavy scene is Reclaim the Streets. And there people were able to, didn't have to deal with the rural roadblocks. So London, Manchester, Nottingham, we did 4, Liverpool and so on. Like the policing can't maintain those roadblocks in an urban environment such that you can't get the assembly of that large number of people together. At Islington, for example, somebody managed to get 8 tonne of sand, stick it in the middle of the high street, put some kids on it, instant roadblock. The tripods went up at either end, somebody arrived with the sound system, and there you are making a statement about the fact that roads divide communities, that you needed to be able to gather together with the motives of everything that we've just been talking about, and you can do so with a nice beat and do it in the middle of the afternoon and make a statement to the community to say things could be otherwise. The idea of protest being of people trying to change things because there's an environmental emergency that is now being more widely accepted than it was. So people have got to take individual and social responsibility to do something about it and not expect the government, the corporates, the money of the situation to do it for them. So a bit of self-reliance and a bit of self-explanatory situations and tribal identity such that we have these concerns and you don't, and we intend to do something about it. I can say, is that not where we started? It's going round again, isn't it? And unfortunately, the clock is so much more urgent than it was in the past. And we were starting to invent all sorts of laws that have got such a disproportionate effect on people that are likely to be objecting to any way that the more right-wing government is starting to have a mind of how social order should be. We don't exist here just to be economic units, to make our way, to grow families and to make the country richer such that everything's fine and wonderful in the garden. How many other aspects of life are there to be concerned about, both in our environmental protection, but in our civil society and what the bloody hell we're doing here as a tribe? What's our objectives? I mean, is it really just to work for the man? And that's what the Tory view of economic success looks like. And if you stand against that, then through the last 50 years of my existence in these communities, you can see in the next chapter unfolding. You hope that government is benevolent to its society, that it's there to represent our best interests and to lock up nasty criminals that rape, murder, pillage and so on, like, and that you want authority to enable you to make your way with your neighbourhoods, with your friends, and to have a good life. But with a surveillance state, the facial recognition systems, ANPR, the community internet surveillance, the state gets to look for all the nasty people amongst us and can fish them out. Well, that's good, isn't it? But if the state changes its complexion and isn't as benevolent as we like to think British society is at the moment, and a more Nazified government becomes in power in the future with those tools, I don't think it takes too much imagination to think that that's so much social control that anything that an authoritarian government doesn't want you to be engaging in, you won't be engaging in it. With an all-seeing, all-powerful 1984 George Orwell type situation, and being a bit of a libertarian here, I want to rail against it and do so, and I hope others join me. Like, while we're separated and continually divided and continually broken up and continually dispersed, it means that we're a bunch of individuals doing our best, which is nowhere near the capacity that we have when we're together. How long was all that?
An hour and a half.
Hour and a half, right?
Yeah.
So you got to get that down to 10 minutes.